Member of the Hindu Center's Board of Advisors, Dr. Venkatachalapati, friends from the media, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to welcome all of you today to the Hindu Center's fourth public discussion, which is centered on making the right to education effective. The purpose of such public interactions is completely in line with what the Center's mission statement, when we inaugurated by the Honorable President a year ago, set out to say is that it would conduct monthly programs which will examine contentious issues of policy debate. In line with this mission, the Center's previous public discussions were on topics of contemporary interest, which include, the first one was on Telangana held in Hyderabad, the second one was on opinion polls held in Chennai, and the third one was on gender-based violence. That event was held in collaboration with the American Center. To set today's discussion in context, education perhaps is the most effective social equalizer. India's progress in literacy since independence has been quite impressive. That does not mean that we've been an outstanding success. In that context, making education as a right to citizens should be seen as one that aims at providing access to education to everybody. But there are hurdles to overcome in that as well: systemic, legal, and most importantly, bureaucratic and implementation levels. So to discuss this, we are very honored to have a very distinguished group of panelists here to share their thoughts on how what is officially called the Right to Free and Compulsory Education Act can be made effective. And it is only apt that this panel is chaired by Dr. V. Vasanthi Devi, former Vice Chancellor of the Manoenmaniam Sundararayan University. It is my honor to say a few words of introduction to Dr. Vasanthi Devi, which to this audience is really superfluous, but nonetheless, Dr. Vasanthi Devi, a few highlights from her distinguished career, spanning from being Vice Chancellor to member of high-power advisory bodies. She received a PhD in history from the University of Philippines, Manila. In addition to a Vice Chancellorship, she is former chairperson of the Tamil Nadu State Women's Commission, a former member of the State Planning Commission, a member of several governmental and non-governmental committees on education and human rights. She is the chairperson of the Institute of Human Rights Education, Madurai, which offers education to children in about 2,000 schools across the country. Without further delay and with a lot of honor, may I now invite Dr. Vasanthi Devi to chair the proceedings. Thank you. You could do it from them.
Friends, my role was suddenly switched yesterday from that of a panelist to be a moderator, because Mr. Ram and Mr. Ravi and a few others who were supposed to have chaired this were not available. However, I've been asked to be both a panelist and a moderator, so that my own views on this issue would be made clear, and I do have very strong positions on this issue, and so I have agreed to that, so that my own views cannot be brushed aside by possible role expectations of neutrality of a moderator. Now, the issue that has been taken up undoubtedly is a burning issue: making RTE effective, strategies, constraints, and outcomes. Now, while discussing the right to education, we know we are dealing with the monumental failure, the Himalayan failure of the Indian Republic, the failure to ensure basic right of every Indian child to quality education that is life-giving, empowering, unshackling, providing social mobility and human dignity to millions who had suffered inhuman denials and abominable indignities for centuries. India's position at the bottom of World Human Development Index is not a little attributed to its failure in education. We have entered the second decade of the 21st century, carrying with us the unfinished agenda of the mid-20th century. Now, why this abysmal record in education? When India is aspiring to be a superpower, boasting of an enviable growth rate, the debate on the issue has been raging since before independence, and the way out has been more or less evident from the successful historical experience of the developed and many developing countries. Many education commissions and committees have also been making strong arguments for breaking out of the crippling conditions. The most important of them was Kothari Commission of the 1960s that argued for a common school system with neighborhood schools as the bedrock of the Indian education system and also as the bedrock of a democratic India. It also argued for a minimum of 6% of the GDP to be set aside to be allocated for education. Now, these two objectives, these two mandates that were set to us in the 60s are still a far cry, still a distant dream. Now, today, when it is realized that the great global advantage that India has in its demographic dividend, that it can only be reaped by providing equal quality free education to all its children, more or less the same basics are identified. The renowned educationist J.P. Nayak talked about the elusive triangle of education with quantity, quality, and equality forming its three sides, warning that if any of one of the sides remained weak, the triangle will collapse. Now, after decades of struggle, and after many strong judicial pronouncements for an effective, equitable system of schooling, the Right to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009 was passed. The act was meant to provide the children of the country education as a fundamental right. Now, this act came out with many flaws. The most important being the ones that are identified by most educational activists and critics and concerned educationists. Now, major ones are, one, this act legitimizes multi-track school system, legitimizes fragmentation of children into many categories. And then second one, that it leaves out of its purview children below 6 years and children between 14 and 18. Thereby, the definition of a child, that is one who is below 18 years, which is globally recognized. Now, there has been a departure from ensuring the right to all these children. However, flawed though it was, the act was welcomed by most people as a milestone in the long journey to equitable education. Many people shed their cynicism and were prepared to give the state the benefit of doubt. I should tell you that I was one of them. Many of us, like Dr. Rajagopalan, were very cynical about this act ever taking off, ever attaining its objective. And there are many very involved and experienced educationists and educational activists in the country who felt that this act just will not work. But many were prepared to give the benefit of doubt, as I said. It is now 3 years since the act was notified. The deadline set in the act for fulfilling most of the requirements ended on April 1, 2013. Where do we stand with regard to the mandates of the act? By all accounts, not even 10% of schools have partially implemented the act. The low priority given by the state to its implementation is palpable. So this is what we are going to discuss. Now, how to make this act and the right to education that might go even beyond the act effective. So what are the strategies, what are the outcomes, and what are the constraints, and why this miserable failure? So where lies the hope? Now, this would be the broad area of our discussion today, and we have a very distinguished panel, and we have an equally distinguished group of participants here. So we expect very fruitful, very productive arguments, at the end of which I guess the Hindu Center will evolve our own recommendations. So the first person in the panel is Mr. Akshay Mangla. He's assistant professor, Harvard Business School, and he would be presenting the major finding of his research in 3 states, Himachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Uttarakhand. The short note that was sent to the panelists says that Mr. Akshay Mangla has developed and tested a theory centered on bureaucratic norms as the critical factor that determines the delivery of education. So he will be the first person to speak, and I guess we give about 15 minutes to each panelist, after which there will be a discussion among the panelists, and then it will be thrown open to the floor. Thank you.
Hello? Yeah, it's working. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here in front of you all and have this opportunity to really discuss one of the most critical issues in India today, which is how do you educate India's young population? And under what conditions can we ensure that schooling is provided and is effective in producing productive, healthy, and dignified population in India? So what I'm going to do is really talk a bit about my research findings, which are drawn from North India, from the 3 states that were mentioned, and maybe explore with you what lessons can be drawn from these North Indian states, of course understanding that the context is different across different regions and different states of India. And so just to start off, maybe to give a background on what I think is a relevant framing of the problem, is that we need to really understand how do public institutions work on behalf of marginalized citizens. The education is one public institution, but there's many. And I think looking at education, we can get a sense of the extent to which states are able to effectively deliver public services for the poor. Now, when many people talk about education and the expansion of education in India, very often there's this developmental aspect to one's thinking, that it's about development. And by development, often the idea is of expansion, of infrastructure expansion, of more inputs into the system. But I would argue that no less relevant, perhaps more relevant, is the idea of integration and inclusion when you think about an education system and the expansion of an education system. And inclusion really is a socio-political process that takes a lot of time. And let me just give an example from the United States. Around the civil rights movement in the United States, there was a big problem of trying to desegregate schools and integrate the African American population into the school system. Now, on the one hand, you could see that as expansion of schooling, education for all, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. But actually what it was trying to get a particular group into the education system that was historically denied the opportunity to have an equal footing with other citizens. And I think when we see the problem in that light, it's not just about expanding schools, it's not just about developing new infrastructure, it's actually about including and changing the mindset of the state and how it relates with marginalized citizens. I think we'll have a better understanding of both the problem and ways to get out of the problem. So that's just to start. Now, a bit about my research and what I found. My research basically was conducted in Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and Uttar Pradesh over 3 years of fieldwork, where I spent about a year in each state conducting interviews with senior officials all the way down to the local school level, where I spent time in select villages, in select districts, to understand what is the role of the bureaucracy and to what extent does the implementation process actually reach the school. And what are the critical inputs for the state, for local society, and for civic groups and civic agencies. And this involved about 500 interviews that I conducted and community level fieldwork. And my findings that I'm going to discuss today are just drawn from a few examples from Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. I'm happy to discuss other examples from these states or from Uttar Pradesh, and also kind of my ideas for where South Indian states may fit into this picture. So in Himachal Pradesh, what I argue essentially is that bureaucratic norms facilitated the expansion of schooling and the effective delivery of schooling in a very short period of time. And by bureaucratic norms, I'm talking about the unwritten rules within the state. See, bureaucracies across Indian states look very similar in their formal garb. They have the same rules of recruitment, they have the same kinds of positions. There's an IAS that's recruited nationally, and that is then allocated to each state. Then state civil servants are hired in the same way. There's the same pay and promotion, largely the same. What's different is the informal norms, almost you could argue the culture within different states as to how they work and how they relate with citizens and how they incorporate local knowledge into the implementation process. So I argue that in Himachal Pradesh, the norms that have evolved are far more what I say are deliberative. Deliberative means they promote discussion, deliberation, participation, especially among lower level officials and civic groups. So when policies are being implemented in Himachal Pradesh, a great deal of civic input is drawn into the system and local input is drawn into the system and actually shapes the policy implementation process all the way up to the top. And I'll just give a few examples for how this works. One example that I observed which was really interesting is that there's a group in Himachal Pradesh, the Gujjar. They're a tribe. The Gujjar are a nomadic tribe. They spend their summers in Himachal Pradesh, then they spend their winters going down to the plains near Uttar Pradesh in Saharanpur district. Now, it's very hard to provide such a group in education in the standard format. You can't just have a school in one place because they're moving around. You can't just have a school with fixed hours because the children are helping to tend the buffalo at different times of the day. So what did bureaucrats do? So local officials in Himachal Pradesh were encouraged to go spend time in Saharanpur, in Uttar Pradesh, to actually talk to the Gujjar and understand what is it that they need to actually ensure their kids come to school. And what they found was that the Gujjar actually want to educate their kids. It's not that they're just uninterested, but what they actually want is schooling that suits the needs of their community. And so they created what is called a mobile school. So instead of having them come to a school, they had a school come to them, where they had school teachers on a kind of a bus, joined the Gujjar on their journey down the plains, and then back up the hills. And what this did was it ensured a bit of flexibility in the system. It was an alternative form of education that many people will have issues with. I'm not saying that this is perfect, but certainly providing an education where it was not provided before. The teachers that were hired by contract, not through the normal system. So in many ways, they were breaking the rules, you could argue. Officials were actually bending and breaking the rules to suit the local needs of the Gujjars. That's just one example. Another example comes from the school calendar that I observed. So in many parts of India, not just in the north, around the harvest time, children are actually helping their parents go collect the harvest. And actually it happens that the final examinations are happening around the same time as the harvest. So that is the worst month possible to hold the final exams because you've basically ensured that children will not succeed on the exams because that's the month that they're not in school. That's the month where you'll find most children are actually helping their parents in the field. Himachal Pradesh, again, using local level input, encouraging local bureaucrats and civic groups to shape the implementation process, adapted the calendar in each of the districts according to the harvest and the climate of each district. So you could have in one district the exam happening a month later or a few weeks later to ensure that children have sufficient time to actually succeed in the examinations. And so this sort of local level flexibility, this local level adaptation actually improved the outcomes on examinations in Himachal Pradesh and learning outcomes for children. So these are two examples where you see deliberation, discussion, and local level participation and input can actually produce a better result for policy implementation. The third example I'll give is just the input of community groups. So in Himachal Pradesh, there's a history of Mahila Mandals. These are women's groups that are involved in local agriculture. They help with farming, they work on forestry management, they work on water management, and actually they're very concerned with education because they need to leave their kids somewhere so they can go perform their work. Right? So the children need at least a place to be that safe. And Mahila Mandals actually took a strong interest in education, and the state actually recognized them as a body. They actually call them MTAs, Mother Teacher Associations, so that their have a legal representation within the state. They can go to the bureaucracy and demand what they need. And it's not just about giving them a legal title. They're actually engaged in a series of capacity building initiatives with local officials. So local officials actually go visit Mahila Mandals at the block level and actually discuss with them what are the issues you're facing in your schools. And slowly these groups actually learn to participate as citizens, that they're not just an excluded group, but their voice is actually important to the state. And also ensuring that the officials at the local level are sensitive to gender needs of these groups, right? So through these sort of repeated interactions with Mahila Mandals that became mother-teacher associations and the local bureaucracy, citizens learned that the state is willing to listen to them. And they started making their own investments back into the education system. So where the state does not provide money, say for football team or for a volleyball team or for art and other activities that make schooling fun, communities provided their own money because they saw that the state is willing to listen to them and adapt schooling to their needs. So you got these investments. Now, the counter example to this comes from Uttarakhand. Again, a very a hilly state, small population, very similar in terms of caste, very similar in terms of its income level and similar economy. But you see a very different bureaucracy. Uttarakhand, as many of you know, was part of Uttar Pradesh until maybe a decade or so back. And in Uttarakhand, I argue there's a much different model at work, which is much more legalistic. It's about law and abiding by rules. So bureaucrats that bend the rules, that try to adapt policies, are disadvantaged. They get sent away to far-flung districts if they try to do anything that breaks the rules. So I'll just give you an example. In Uttarakhand, there's also Mahila Mandals. And in Uttarakhand, actually, the Mahila Mandals have a longer history than even in Himachal Pradesh. They were there at the Chipko movement. They were there even before that, working on natural resource management, forestry management, and so on. And there's a history of other community groups, Van Panchayat, that manage the forests in Uttarakhand. Now, these groups had created their own local schools. They were called Balwadis at the time. They were just kind of like Anganwadis, but not official. They were unofficial schools. Now, when the state came and wanted to regulate these schools, they found that these schools were too far away, right, to meet the official norms of school distance, according to the official requirements. So they ended up closing many of these schools because they're following the rules. And what happened was the local communities realized that they have no input into the system, that their schools and the input that they're willing to give, the investments they're willing to make, will not be recognized by the state. So as a consequence, you see now in Uttarakhand one of the highest rates of privatization in the school system, that even at the village level, groups are exiting the government system as fast as possible because they realize the state will not respond to their needs, because the state is just going to apply the rules in a top-down manner without any local level input. So bureaucrats in Uttarakhand will also say, look, we're just abiding by the rules. These aren't bad people. These are people who want to do the best they can do, right? But what their incentives are, right? The system, how it supports them, that's what's at issue. And I'll end with one or 2 points, which is, well, what are the conditions that allow for better, more effective delivery of education? So bureaucratic norms, what I've discussed today, really captures a snapshot of the differences across these states. But what allows these norms to evolve? What is the political process that allows bureaucrats to do the job that they can do, right? And here I find a really important role for political leadership. So the role of political leadership is relevant not just because leaders are there and they're elected, but because leaders create an environment for bureaucrats to do their jobs. So in Himachal Pradesh, Dr. Y.S. Parmar actually would spend a lot of time with senior officials and encourage them to work with junior level officials to go spend time in villages, go ask people what they need. And this created an environment, almost an organizational culture within the education bureaucracy to ensure that officials are listening to local level needs. In other states, so take Uttarakhand, the a few sets of chief ministers actually, at that time it was Uttar Pradesh, they came from the hills actually. G.B. Pant, N.D. Tiwari, these people came from Almora district. Almora is a hill district, and they left Almora and went to Lucknow. And from Lucknow, actually, they wanted to come to Delhi. In fact, I believe N.D. Tiwari people would call Nay Delhi Tiwari, because he spent more time in Delhi than in Lucknow. And he spent very little time in the hills. And the way to get to Delhi was to follow the rules. Just go by the rules, keep your head down, and bureaucrats learned this. So what they ended up doing was just going by the rules of senior officials and not listening to local level needs, and that's what would get them higher up in their careers. So in a way, what we find is that strict rule following can often harm the implementation of education, and a political environment that does not allow for innovation can also harm implementation. And last point is, what is the lesson here for RTE? Now today we're trying to implement this act. What is the chief lesson? And I think while it's an interesting and a very important milestone to have such an act in place, I think largely right now it's being seen from activists and many others as an issue of compliance. We need to comply with the RTE norms. If we just have all the norms set and everyone complies with the norms, then we're going to get education. But when you ask a local official, or you ask a school teacher, you ask even parents about the RTE Act, the question isn't about the rules. It's about, how do I actually do this? How do I actually ensure that all of these things are met? And here I think Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan can offer some lessons that, when we think about development of education, this is where I began the discussion. When we think about expansion of infrastructure, these are just one-time investments. You built a school, you built it, and that's it. But the delivery of education requires repeated engagement. It's not just one time. You have to keep talking to parents. You have to keep bringing them into the education system. You have to keep talking to kids, making sure that they're happy and that they're actually learning something in the school. You have to keep talking to school teachers and making sure that their needs are met. So these repeated interactions, right, they require discussion. They require what I call deliberation, a more participatory approach to the implementation process. And quite frankly, maybe even some flexibility in the rules themselves. Maybe the rules need to be adapted to suit local needs somewhat, using local knowledge as a base to then reinforce what we would hope is the end result, which is students who are learning and happy and healthy. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akshay. I think he has brought in his research experience that focuses on some kind of a field level experience of how legislations can be interpreted by progressive bureaucratic intervention, by people-oriented bureaucratic intervention, and how much of a difference it can make. Well, we are talking about national level issues also, for which this field level experience could provide certain guidelines on how a different kind of a bureaucratic culture can bring about the delivery of goods. That's what he is talking about. So later on we will discuss the implications of what he has studied and how large a canvas he has covered, and whether the implications of this study can really be upscaled to be relevant to all the states. Now, when he is talking about the bureaucracy in Himachal Pradesh that has played a very progressive, proactive role, I definitely think about a comparable bureaucracy in Tamil Nadu. Now, Tamil Nadu has had a very distinguished experience in education, and our own bureaucrats have won acclaim, and we have one such sitting here who will be the next panelist, Mr. M.P. Vijay Kumar, who has very deservedly got national level acclaim and even global recognition. Now he, as all of you would know, that he initiated a very big, almost a revolutionary pedagogical change in the classrooms in Tamil Nadu, what came to be called as activity-based learning, which transformed the classroom from its very frozen, dysfunctional state earlier on to a very vibrant space where children would learn, children would participate, and more than anything else, the immense courage, the daring with which he led this upscaling to cover how many schools? 40,000 schools? 40,000 schools in Tamil Nadu, while this kind of an experiment had been confined to a few elite schools. So this is the possibility, perhaps, when you have a bureaucrat who is totally dedicated to his role. However, I would like to caution this in the light of what Akshay has said, that in spite of Vijay Kumar's being there, Tamil Nadu education scene is bristling with problems. Now we have, he talked about Uttarakhand where children are leaving the government schools. Privatization has reached its limits almost in Tamil Nadu. And government schools are closing down. I think there is some study that showed 1,874 government schools closed down in Tamil Nadu in just 1 year. So there's a virtual exodus from free government schools to fee charging private schools. Why is this happening? Now, and there is this enormous demand for English medium education, which is almost dysfunctional, I would say, when it is taken to children whose home environment does not provide familiarity with English. Now this is killing, destroying the very meaning of education. Now, so this is happening. And I mean, there are so many other ills. Now he was talking about the local initiative and participatory role being given by the participatory role that is to be taken up by the school management committees. In fact, every public school in Tamil Nadu, in the country, is supposed to be, after the coming in of RTE, is supposed to be totally managed by the school management committees. The entire authority is to be vested in them. Now we know that very little of authority has really been passed on to the local level. It is the bureaucracy that is keeping its powers tightly in its fists. That bureaucracy is very jealous of its powers, and there is absolutely no decentralization that has taken place. Now what is called the 3 Fs, functions, functionaries and finance, none of this has been passed on to the local governments. The 73rd and 74th amendments that brought in changes in the Panchayat Raj in devolution that hardly exists in Tamil Nadu. So why I am saying is this, with even bureaucracy that is considered to be very meritorious. Now this is the scenario in Tamil Nadu. So where do we seek the answers? Next is Mr. MP Vijay Kumar.
I feel too small, simple, humble before this distinguished audience because I've been seeing some of the faces who have been our mentors. All that we have done in Tamil Nadu has been under their supervision and guidance. So I see some of the faces. I feel too small and humble. But now that you have made me a panelist, so I need to speak. I'll just take about 10 to 15 minutes. Now, the subject given to the panel was strategies, constraints, and outcomes of RTE. Now, what are the outcomes we expect? The RTE also say that we want all our children in the age group of 6 to 14, or the appropriate age, to be in quality, standard elementary school, formal school, and get quality education. This is what RTE stipulates as an outcome. Outcome, you know, it's a broader concept. Let us come to objectives. There are 3 objectives. We want every child to be in school between 5 plus, 6 plus to 14 plus. Elementary is up to 8, primary is 1 to 5. So we want all children to be in school at the appropriate age. That is item 1. Secondly, children who get admitted in class 1 should continue up to class 8. That's what it says about attendance, retention, enrollment. Thirdly, children who continue up to class 8 should get quality education. Now, where do we stand? Now, this is what we expect under RTE. RTE stipulates that this is what the state should ensure. Where do we stand? Now, when you want all children to be in schools, we must provide enough number of schools. What we say access rate. Invariably, with just about 5-6% shortfall, but 90-95% of our country
has access to schools. The last mile is just about 5-6%, especially in states like Bihar, UP, Rajasthan. Barring these 3-4 backward states, most of the states have access to school. That is, a child within, from the habitation of the child, within 1 kilometer, we have a school. We have a government school. This is a well accepted, acknowledged data. That is item 1. So we have access. How many children are in schools? Again, if you look at this forward-looking states, we have got 2 indicators to assess the number of children in school. One is gross enrollment ratio, other one is net enrollment ratio. Gross enrollment ratio can be more than 100 because it is, even if the child drops out and gets enrolled, it is counted as twice. But net enrollment ratio is age specific, child specific. The gross enrollment ratio of some of the states are more than 120, 130. The net enrollment ratio for the country as a whole is nearing 95, 96, which means broadly, leaving behind about 5-6% of last mile push, we have children in school. Now what about quality? Item 1, we have access, children in school, and how many are retained? The second issue of attendance, we are retaining about 90 to 93% of children. About 5-6% children they still drop out. If up to primary, if it goes to elementary, it will be about 8-9%. I'm just giving you the gross figures with about 10% variation between states. We have children in school, we have schools, we have children in school, we have teachers as well. If you look at the teacher-pupil ratio, it is fairly high, about 30 to 35. 30 to 30 children, 35 children per teacher. Again, with some variations. See, I can't generalize for the country as a whole, but broadly, we have children in school, we have teachers, we have classrooms, but plethora of incentives. Noon meal, textbook, uniform, everything is available. But what happens to quality? There has been a number of studies, both government-sponsored studies and private studies. They say up to the children who complete grade 5, nearly 65% of them could not perform even basic operations in mathematics. Nearly 35% children are not able to read and write fluently well in their mother tongue. So this is an issue. Now when you say what are the constraints, what are the strategies, what are the problems in RTE? RTE Act contemplates provision of access. There's a compulsion on the part of state. I'll have some water. RTE, the Right to Education Act, contemplates provide school. There's a compulsion on the part of state to provide school. It has to be free. In the sense, there should not be any fee structure inhibiting children to access schools. Social barriers should not be there. Physical barriers should be overcome. So these are all barriers which should be overcome as per the Act. So physically, children are school. But how many of them learn? The national surveys indicate, as I mentioned to you, it is only about literacy and numeracy. Now, do we expect only literacy and numeracy from our schools? You might have heard the sibling rivalry. The sibling rivalry between two brothers in a country, I don't want to name them. The father has left behind a property worth of 3,75,000 crores. But these siblings, they quarrel over the sharing this property. You know what education they've got? Both of them are academically brilliant. One is an MBA from Pennsylvania, other one is from Stanford. But can we call them educated persons? So when we say quality, what do you mean by quality? Is just literacy and numeracy alone we mean by quality? Now RTE Act specifies. See, one section 29 of the RTE Act, which has been completely ignored. See, many things we take it as a ritual in our country. See, RTE Act says so many things. Access, yes. Bring children, yes. It has to be barrier free, yes. No detention, yes. Admit children in school, private schools should provide for 25%, yes. But they're all not an end by itself. They're all means to an end. But what is the end? The outcome is giving quality education. But have we succeeded? And has ever civil society or media speak about this in the length and depth it desires? If some school is leaking, if some teachers are not attending, we make it an issue, big issue, hue and cry. But whereas, you know how much money we spend in our country on education? 136,000 crores every year. Nationally, annually, Government of India spends 136,000 crores on 186 million children. There are 186 million children. Madam used to say, when few engineers and doctors go away from a country, we make an issue as brain drain. But here is the case where this 186 million children's brain getting wasted every day. What does it mean? You see, it means if 50% children don't learn in the classroom, in spite of having classrooms, etc., therefore quality is not just literacy numeracy. Quality is much more. Now, in amplification of RTE, NCRT has come out with an extraordinarily good document. Professor Krishna Kumar, who was instrumental, he has brought out an extraordinarily good document on National Curriculum Framework. It spells out the objectives of education in 4 ways. Again, you see, another thing I have been noticing, if we buy a small electronic gadget, a smartphone or a micro oven, we take care to see that we get a manual, we get trained how to use them. But what about our children? Do we ever care to learn how to respond to our children, how to make them how to groom them better? We never do, because we take it for granted. We take the response to our children at home for granted. We take response to our children in school for granted. Now, this NCRT document is the most celebrated document. It encapsulates all the previous philosophies, and according to our culture, what should be the objectives of education, which are indicators of quality. It says 4 things. First of all, we want our children to think and act independently. Thinking is not enough. That's what education says. Education says, the definition for education is, madam, please remind me if I am crossing my limit. Madam?
Yes, you got 3 more minutes.
Okay. Now the objectives of education are clearly spelled out. Education is not willingness, it is acting. It is not just saying, it is doing. But 4 objectives of education as enumerated in our document by NCRT's document. Children have to think and act independently, number 1. Secondly, we must give them problem-solving skills. The children should be able to flexibly and creatively solve problems in life. Thirdly, we are a democracy. We don't shoot and kill when we have disagreement. It has to be consensus, discussion. So democratic values of mutual respect, give and take, civic rights. The third thing. Fourthly, we want every one of the child to learn all these skills, not just few elite children or those who are front benchers. Now, having said this, how do you get this? Now, this is what we want. How do you get this? See, if you want to learn swimming, you need to swim. You can't expect our children to learn swimming by listening alone. That's what we do. 24/7 we give lectures in the classroom. How do you expect children to learn? This is system failure. But RTE Act specifically addresses that don't do this. You just read section 29. It says, please don't do this. It has to be child-centric. Provide opportunity for them to learn. Let them practice. See, they need to do, experience, reflect. Unless these 3 aspects are there in the classroom, they can't learn. Therefore, one of the biggest challenges of RTE, let us not get bogged down with the small issues. So few children are out of school. But what happened to children who are already in school? When 95% children are in school, if they are not learning, saying that few children out of school. Yes, of course, you need to bring everybody inside. But ignoring the bulk of them. Now who has to do this? I will say, it is sheer lack of sensitivity, clarity, and orientation, both administratively and politically. If at all somebody is sensitive, it just takes half a second to make things happen. And I have seen in governmental systems, hierarchy matters. If I'm a director, whatever I want will happen, whether it is sense or nonsense. Whatever I want. But if you are sensitive enough, And if you are in the helm of affairs, you ask for these things, they'll get it. If somebody is not sensitive, then who is to blame? Our recruitment process, our training mechanism. We want bureaucrats who are sensitive, who are simple, who are humble, not brilliant and arrogant. Same is the case as the political leadership as well. Thank you. I have more things to say. Maybe I'll react when questions come.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vijay Kumar. Now you can see that what he spoke, he came from his rich experience and from his very humane heart, both. So this is what he had been all through his career, and post-retirement, he has withdrawn into Coimbatore and he is experimenting these the values that he learned in his village and in the villages around. So I told him that well, he may be very attached to his village, but we cannot let his village monopolize him. We need him to function in a larger canvas. Now, of what he said, this national curriculum framework and its values, where our attention must be drawn, to think and act independently, to evolve to imbibe democratic values. Now, all of us know our children have absolutely no possibility of doing any of this. Now, our children are being programmed from the time they are born, particularly in elite families, that unfortunately set the model, which is to be emulated down the line. So they are all programmed from the time you din it into their heads. They should become computer engineers, doctors, whatever else is in vogue at the time. And well, to think and to act, you need time, you need space, you need an environment where children are given time to think and express and participate. Now, where is the time? Now, in almost all states, particularly in Tamil Nadu, I can say, children go to school from 9 to 4, then to tuition classes from 4 to 8, 8 to 9 they do their homework. Now, what decides this? What drives this? Now, look at the weight of the curriculum. We've been talking a lot about this, the famous learning without burden. The Yashpal committee's learning without burden. This didn't it into the national brain, but nothing works because it is a tremendous competition. Education has become a field where there is absolute cutthroat competition. Schools are competing, parents are competing, you have different levels of schools. The heavier the curriculum, then that school is supposed to be the elite school, and then at the gate of which you spend nights to get an application form to admit your child. So this is the reality. The competition and the sky-high aspirations of better off elite families, this is deciding what the curriculum is, what the content is, because they are bringing up their children for global competition. They are not bothered about the rest of the country. And the children who belong to 80% of our society cannot cope with this curriculum. And this weight is crushing them, and sooner or later they drop out or they end up as non-learning children. So to think and act independently, we need a completely different educational system, content, language of learning, everything has to be changed. It just doesn't come by developing sensitivity. Maybe we have all lost sensitivity. And so sensitivity, yes, but at what level? That also needs to be discussed later. Now the next speaker is Dr. Rajagopalan, who is the doyen of educationists in Tamil Nadu. Now any issue concerning education, now we all look up to him to give the leadership and to tell us where our heart should lie. And his heart is all the time with the most deprived children, and during his career as a headmaster, if you listen to the stories, unfortunately he doesn't have the time, of the kind of children he extricated from utter poverty and total marginalization, and how he, by just cherishing those children, by nurturing those children, how he brought them up. Now, if every headmaster could do this, we can definitely do wonders. Thank you.
Right. Madam Chairman and friends, I noted down certain things to say, but now I have changed my mind. I looked at 3 dictionaries for the meaning of the bureaucrat. None of them gave a good picture about a bureaucrat. A bureaucrat is someone who is totally anti-democratic, is rigid, and all these things. Therefore, why Dr. Akshay took up bureaucrat, the term bureaucrat in his study itself, I wonder. Anyhow, bureaucrats cannot change the world. Please accept it. It is the political will that is necessary. We are in the 65th year of our republic. We are still talking about right to education. Why? Because the political will is lacking. Without the political will, we cannot achieve. I will just give an example where political will was able to succeed to a large extent. That is the period of Mr. Kamaraj as Chief Minister. What did he do? First of all, he put education and finance under one single minister. The senior most minister, Mr. C. Subramaniam, was given charge of both finance and education. Therefore, education did not suffer for want of funds. That was a remarkable thing that he did. And secondly, he traveled throughout the state, telling the people, requesting the people to send their children to school. It was about 60 years back. He visited every village, pleaded with parents to send their children to schools. And then he selected as a director a totally committed person. He did not go by seniority. He overlooked some people and appointed a person who is totally committed to the philosophy of education for the masses. And he also told him, don't be confined to your room. In those days, no room of any officer was air conditioned. And nowadays, every director has got a beautiful air conditioned room. Don't be confined to your room. Go about the state. Meet the people. Tell the teachers, tell parents that they must send their children to school, and ask the teachers to be proud of their profession and all these things. Teachers heard him with rapt attention and followed him. That is one thing remarkable. And then Panchayat unions were given the responsibility of providing primary education. Now they have been taken over by the government. The day the government took over those schools, the downfall started. The then Education Secretary R.A. Gopal Sami ICS warned that the inspector and the administrator cannot be one and the same person. As inspector, he would find certain defects in the system. As administrator, he had to rectify it. If both the functions are with the same person, he would not find any defect in the system. Therefore, it will get itself accumulated and the schools will go to docks. That was what he said, and it had come true. That is the remarkable thing about R.A. Gopal Sami's warning. He said, education in those days, Panchayat unions administrate the schools. the education department was in charge of quality in schools. Therefore, it worked. So, schools were able to offer quality education to all children. And then school, if a particular group of people wanted a school, they have to contribute a small amount, a token amount to the government. Therefore, when the school was started, people thought that it was their school. It was not a government school or panchayat school or anything like that. They owned the school. And then school improvement conferences were held whereby the infrastructure of all the schools were improved to a large extent. School education up to SSLC was made free 50 years back. That was a remarkable thing. And there was no single untrained teacher in any school. All the schools had fully qualified, trained teachers. These were all possible because there was the political will. The chief minister himself felt that it was his duty to offer quality education to all the poor people. And then other schemes like free noon meals and other things are. What happened now is schools have been taken over by the government. Now we are having an RTE Act. All of us in this room got our education without any Right to Education Act. Therefore, RTE Act, whom should it have addressed? Those who have been denied education for generations. But it didn't do that. For all. For those who are the best of education and those who have no education are all bundled together in one single act. Therefore, the net result is still those who had no education for generations continue to have low-class education in their schools. Unless we get over this phenomenon, our poor people will not get quality education. What do you mean by quality education? Every day some news correspondent or other, they used to ask me questions. Even yesterday they asked me a question, why are Tamil Nadu students not shining in IIT entrance examination? As if IIT entrance examination is the be-all and end-all of all education. I told him something and he put up some certain other thing in the paper. See, our curriculum has been planned for the middle class. It has not been prepared for the poor people. And children have no place in our system. Without schools, can you imagine a school? Who are the most important people in the school? You may have a building, you may have teachers, and if there are no children, it is not a school. But what is a place for children in the system? Nothing. They are treated like slaves. They are treated like beggars. This is very, very poor. Unless the dignity of the child is maintained in the school, how can they learn? With fear, if they come to classroom, how can they learn? Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, Tagore said. But our children come to school with fear. They are afraid of the teacher, they are afraid of the textbook, they are afraid of the examination, they are afraid of everything. Unless children are relieved of this fear in the schools, they cannot learn. Therefore, these are all some of my humble submissions. We have to go a long way. We have to think about those who do not get education. Let us not remember about those who are already going to school and other things. But everyone is only worried about what type of education my child will be getting, which school can I go. Privatization of education during Kamraj period, 98% of children were in the common school system. All were going to the same school. The landlord and the tenant sent their children to the same school, and the children sat side by side. There was no kind of a distinction there. We learned together. But now, according to your social status, according to your economic status, you can pick and choose schools. Therefore, education has become the greatest dividing factor in our system. Therefore, it is the government's sole responsibility to offer quality education to all. It cannot shirk its duty and give this job to some other person and say everyone has been enrolled. No. Enrollment in a proper school is the most important thing, and the government's first duty is to provide good and quality education to all. These are my humble suggestions. Now you see, 1992 National Policy on Education was really adopted by the Parliament. Now, after 20 years, there has been no further policy on education. The first policy on education was in 1968, then 1986, 1992 it was revised. After that, there has been no national policy on education. For the state, there is no policy on education. Then what is it? Without a policy on education, where are we going? According to the whims and fancies of certain people. No, it is not. We should all clamor. We are all educated people, and we also occupy certain positions in life. Therefore, we have got a duty to tell the government how it should function, how it should involve all the people in decision making. Unless we do that, our children, especially from the poorest of the poor, will continue to be denied any education. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajgopalan. As it is always his way, he has hit the nail on its head. And bringing the days of Kamraj back to our mind, he has shown where the basic flaw lay and where we went wrong in our 65 years of experience in an independent country. Now, as he said, in Kamaraj's days, there were 98% of the children were going to government schools, and there were just a handful of private schools where maybe the most elite children went. Now, this is the case not only in Kamaraj's Tamil Nadu. This is the case all over the world. In all the developed countries, most of the progressive developing countries, this is the case. It's a common school system with neighborhood schools, fully funded by the state. And the historical experience of all developed countries shows that this is the bedrock on which you can build any modern nation, any progressive nation, any inclusive nation. Now, from Kamaraj days, when we seem to be progressing in the right direction, then we completely diverted. We completely got drawn into a totally different path of privatization. So once a multi-track school system is permitted to come in, then the government schools will become the refuge of only the poorest of the poor. And that is the case today. The poorest of the poor alone go to the government schools, and quite a large number of them are Dalits. Now you find that in government school, a disproportionate proportion of children are Dalits, 50%, 60% in some areas. You see, so this is how, and we know that why a school system, schools where only the poor go, get neglected. Now anything that's only for the poor is considered to be of poor quality. So nobody is prepared to send their children, and the school system, the public school system suffered a complete collapse once the private schools were allowed to function. Same happened in the healthcare system also. So so once you allow these parallel streams to come up, then there will definitely be a streaming, there will definitely be a hierarchy among schools. So in India we have an unbearably unacceptable hierarchy of schools today, with schools for every mini class, making sure that no two classes, children of no two classes ever meet. There is no space where the children of the affluent, not so affluent, or the poor can meet. No classrooms, no parks, no playgrounds where they ever meet. So this is a complete fragmentation of the nation that is taking place, and that is what he insisted upon. And the first sentence he started with, the bureaucratic class is anti-democratic. Now I was reminded of a famous book that came out in the 1970s, Myron Weiner's book on what was the title of the book? Child and the State. Child and the State. Yes, and he says the bureaucratic class talks about our children and their children. Our children deserve the best in the world. They must be given the best education in the world. Their children, of course, they need to be given something. You know what their needs. A few things, just make sure that schools are there, whatever they dish out. So some crumbs have to be thrown to them. This is the attitude of the bureaucratic class by and large. Now I'm not talking about exceptions. So through this class, is it possible to bring about a transformation? That's the issue that Dr. Rajgopalan posed. Now the last speaker in our panel is one who's half our age, half my age at least, yes. And Balaji Sampath, he has set up an institution that has become a byword for bringing quality education to those who are most marginalized, Aid India, and this has managed to inspire a large number of young people. You'll find people from different walks of life, from the most cushy jobs. They have given up their jobs and they have come and joined. We have one sitting there, Ravi Shankar, and so many such young people who have flocked to his organization because of his inspirational leadership. And this institution today, he will talk about it, that it is running 1,000 after-school centers in the most deprived villages, mainly in Dalit villages, trying to make good what they lose out in the classroom. So, Balaji Sampath.
Thank you. Actually, the advantage of speaking last is you can agree or disagree with everybody else before you. So first I would like to start by agreeing with SSR sir. I think bureaucrats can't change the education system. Okay. I'll come back to that point again. I'll start also by disagreeing with Mr. MP Vijay Kumar. He talked about the fact that there is hierarchy and our job is to sensitize the top people in the hierarchy. No, I think our job is to challenge the fact that there is a hierarchy. I don't think we have to accept the fact that there is a hierarchy. I think the hierarchy is part of the problem. And I think history has also taught us that the most efficient dictators are worse than the best, or the not even best, I would say, most imperfect democracy. So I would still for any day go for a more democratic, less hierarchical structure with its chaos, with inefficiency in ability to implement things, etc., because it will still be much better than a very efficient dictator. And I think that danger always exists when there is hierarchy. I also want to start by disagreeing with Mr. Akshay Mangala, and I think there is, not completely disagree. I think there's a lot of value in some of the points he's raised, particularly the fact that there are delta small changes that can be made, and these small changes do matter. And officers can make efficient execution, and it's very, very important. I have a lot of value myself. I've seen when you change calendars, when you look at reducing the workload in register maintenance and all that. But while all that is important, all that works within a larger framework, and the larger framework of and the paradigm within which we work is also equally important. In fact, I would say a lot more important. And I would like to speak today about that. And the paradigm is basically what is taught, how is it taught, but even more importantly, who decides all this stuff? Is it the government and the bureaucracy that decides this, or are parents going to play an important role in this? I think those debates are very important, and these cannot be done by a few bureaucrats here and there looking at playing a very sensitive role. I think there is an importance for the culture, there is importance for sensitive bureaucrats and all of that, but I think education is just too important to be left to them. And this is something I have realized over a period of time. We should first understand that we have been educating our children as a species, as a society, for ages. Millions of years of human evolution is about education. In fact, probably that is the most important activity of human beings all of except the last 100 years. Pretty much before that, every society, every community, every parent played an important role in deciding what kind of education my child will have. In the last 100 years, we have shifted to a system where policies and governments and bureaucrats and ministers will make that decision for us. We also shifted to the fact that we will somehow believe experts will be able to make that choice. And I think it has been a bad decision. Education is just too important to be left to educationists, including the panel here, including me, and too important to be left to governments or bureaucrats alone. I think we should first understand that point. Yes, there are issues on how this can be implemented, but I think that's something that we should look at. And coming back to this democracy point, I think one thing we have learned in democracy is not just about elections and institutions. These are important, but they are not the only thing that keeps a democracy alive or vibrant. You need good media. You need active public participation. You need, wherever you have civil society growing, making its noise, organizing itself, you have much better democracy. I think in the recent elections and so on, you can see that kind of vibrancy, and it's important that happens. I'm not saying that the decisions will be good or bad, but it's overall good in terms of the direction setting that happens because of this. And I find everywhere bureaucracy is afraid, tends to be very afraid, and particularly in Tamil Nadu, I find that a lot more. In fact, I was quite surprised that in Bihar, which usually considered backward, bureaucracy is a little bit more willing to work with communities. But in Tamil Nadu, I find it's very afraid of involving parents, involving communities, involving NGOs, because they have well laid out plans, and they feel like all these discussions will somehow jeopardize the plans. I mean, you'll have to modify and so on. And all of this basically means my plan is changing, and they're afraid of that kind of change. So people are, so bureaucracy is willing to involve NGOs as implementers. I have this plan, you go and execute it. But involving people to say, why should your plan be like this? Why not change the plan is something that they are not very comfortable. And that's, I think, something we should seriously think about. They're afraid of counter opinions. Many large-scale programs tend to be introduced with very little discussion. I think the point is not whether an implementation, and we had started off by talking, for example, about the ABL program. Let's not worry about whether a particular program is good or bad. The basic point is that should it be introduced without debate? Should it be introduced without consulting parents? Any kind of large-scale change? Just imagine the amount of media space we had, amount of discussion we had on whether IIT entrance should be basically centralized or not. We had huge amount of media space for this, which affects maybe some 10,000 children, ultimately. But you had much less discussion for something that affects 1 million children, or even more, 1 crore children actually, about 10 million children who in Tamil Nadu are going through a system. Any small change in a government school system will make huge impact, but there's very little discussion that actually happens. And I think that all of this says that there is very little participation. And when we talk to officers, when we had discussions with teachers, often you find this saying, no, poor parents, they don't know how to do subtraction. What are you talking? They don't understand subtraction, they can't do division. How can they talk about whether we are teaching well? Well, actually we are willing to say that really poor, illiterate people who cannot read a government policy have the right to elect a chief minister or a education minister or a health minister. None of them can read the policy. But you're saying, no, they may not be able to read the policy, but we believe that in their right to decide whether the policy made sense for me. And I think that's a very important thing in democracy. You don't need to be able to implement or understand or execute to be able to judge. Everybody is a good judge. Sorry to say this in front of an existing judge, but former judge. But basically, the point is that everybody makes up their mind. Everybody has the right to judge, and parents definitely have the right to judge whether their children are getting good quality education. They don't need to be able to do division themselves or teach their children how to subtract. I may not know all of this, but I still have the right to decide this teacher is a bad teacher. I think that right is an important right. We give that for even higher levels of decision making, and I think that level of decision making must be given to poor parents in deciding for their own children. I think that is a very strong issue that we need to probably debate and discuss, but it's something that is a necessity. Because I don't think these two are equal. A very poor person can easily decide whether my child is learning, whether my child can read well. I may not be able to read, but that doesn't stop me from doing that. And I think when we're talking about participation, there is a problem in terms of what you want to involve people. We have broken this notion of a community in every front. We have individualized people heavily across. I mean, society has moved in that direction a lot. But then we want poor parents to somehow suddenly get this feeling that I must improve my school. They don't want to improve their school. I mean, honestly speaking, what kind of choice will we make? I mean, all of us, when we say we should have Tamil medium English education, English medium education is wrong. All of this is said in English, unfortunately. And that's a big problem. When people are saying we must have government schools, we must do this, we must make sure everybody goes there, improve quality. The point is the people who are saying this are not the poorest. These are people who are saying that my child will study in a private medium, English medium school. So I think we must keep that in mind and respect the fact that the poor are making very, very sensible choices. Let us not start by saying that, see, just because they are inarticulate, they may not be able to say why I have made a particular choice, doesn't mean they are making foolish choices. What I have found is that you go talk to a poor person, they will shake their head heavily. If they shake it too much, that means they're basically saying, get out. Enough, I'm not listening to you. Okay, if they're actually arguing, probably they're listening to you. So often what I have found is that at the end, their actions speak much, much more louder than their words. They're not able to articulate, that doesn't mean they're dumb. So if many times they're saying, I don't like this school, I'm going to change them to another school, don't ridicule their choice. I think first important point, I respect their choice. The point is they're making a choice within limited choices. I mean, if you have only two political parties to elect between, I will select between one of them. If I have a third choice, maybe I will choose that. I'm not saying that the third choice, people go in for a third choice saying that's better than the other two. They're saying other two I have seen, I don't like it. Let me see this, maybe I won't like this either. But the point is that they are making a sensible choice given their circumstance. And I think that's very important to respect. And yeah, thank you. And I think it's important to recognize that when they are moving from one system into another and there's a huge rush from government schools into private schools, they are not saying, I know private schools are better. They're saying, no, I know government schools are not doing their job. What job are they not doing? Is it that they are not putting in good teachers? Is it that they are not having playgrounds? Is it not they are not having buildings? Actually, all of this the parents don't care about. My child is not studying, that's all. That's my problem. And it is in an individualistic society, it is all nice to say that we will all be individualistic, you all be community oriented. It will take time to become community oriented. First is the point is that they are saying my child must get good quality education. And I think if schools can start involving parents in improving quality of education, you will get public participation. How to build a better wall, like you said, you won't. Better playground, you won't get public participation. Are teachers coming? Are teachers qualified? Is RTE norms being implemented? You won't get good quality. I mean, you won't get participation from people. You start saying how to make sure all children can do subtraction well. How to make sure all children can basically start reading well. Can they learn English better? You will get huge amount of participation. And we talked to parents, this is what we found. When we said, why don't you go and start demanding this from the school? They said, no, actually easier than that is for us to start after school centers. Maybe we can hire 4 people, we can pay them and we can start. This is a choice we make all the time. If your school doesn't deliver, what do? Pull your child out of that school and put them in another school which you think will deliver. It's a big job. to be able to improve quality of a school. But it's easy to vote against one school and move into another. And if poor parents do this, we get upset. But I think that's something that's happening. Governments can make bigger decisions. Asking individual poor parents to make those decisions is tough. Already they have a tough life. And I think seriously, what education requires today is community involvement, parent involvement. But you're not going to get parent involvement by trying to get them involved in things that are not of their concern. The thing that they are mostly concerned about is how does my child learn better? And I think if you get them involved in that and believe that they can make that decision, like if you can get parents to start saying, I'm evaluating the progress of my children, I'm going to evaluate this class, go and ask questions to teacher, why is my child not able to do this? And you bring forms and formats for that. Simple rules. I mean, no, you don't have to tell them you don't know how to teach, you don't have to subtract. I'm saying you can do this without all of that. We tried developing a skill chart. We actually introduced it in a lot of places, got parents to start questioning. When you do those things, you say, why is my child got only 3 ticks? Why not 4 ticks? Why is my child not able to do it? Ask a neighbor whether my child really is able to do it. All of this really brings parents to get to participate. I think that will improve quality of school. But you see, the problem is bureaucrats are afraid, teachers are afraid. Often politicians are also afraid to some extent. But I think that is something that is, once you do that, focus on outcomes, focus on quality of learning, focus on what matters to them, other things will follow. They will probably also start saying we must have security, we must have a school wall, etc. But after this, not before this. Right now, they are saying, this school is not going to deliver. I want basically basic delivery after that. So the point is, it is important that we must recognize the French Revolution happened, or we don't know if this is actually true, but at least people say that when people asked for bread, somebody said eat cake. So I think the point is when people are asking for bread, first give them bread. Yes, of course, you can also probably organize cakes and provide it to them, but that's for later. Right now, when children are not subtracting, not reading, not able to do basic arithmetic, basic skills, focus on it, deliver, then talk about improvement in other areas. Nobody says you should not do that, but the point is you can respect people's wishes. Right now you are hungry, make sure the basic food is provided. Then you can look at the next step. I mean, nobody's going away. We have waited for so many years, and I think nobody's going away anytime soon. I think the focus really, and it's really sad in one way, I really think that the RTE has not delivered on something. When we should have built schools, when people were demanding schools, more schools, at that point we didn't have the RTE Act. At that time, the government was building IITs and it was building the big institutions and so on, focusing on education for just a few. Today, people are saying there are schools. Get me quality. The RTE doesn't talk about quality. It talks about everything except what people are asking for. It's too late, too little. I think that's something that we should keep in mind. Seriously, we wanted to improve quality of public schooling. We should have just nationalized all the schools. Correct, it will cause a lot of debate and a lot of discussion. Is it possible? Is it not possible? It will cause confusion because private schools, the schools of the elite will suddenly come into that. And so we'll all get very worried, but I think it's important to get worried. That would have been a policy which meant something. Today, this policy doesn't mean much. It's not going to get executed. There's nothing there at all. So for me, as far as I'm concerned, RTE doesn't do anything much overall. In fact, the only part of RTE that is being debated is the 25% in elite schools, if you think about it. I mean, there are many more schools that are there. How about improving quality of government schools? That's not going to happen. We all know it. So we don't discuss it too much. Okay, if we had said nationalize all schools, I think we'd have had a lot more debate before it could have been passed. And that debate would have been essential and effective. And I seriously think that at some level, involving communities, civil society, and all of parents will bring about significant change. But it is not going to come because bureaucrats will involve them. It will come because the political process will have no option. Bureaucrats will be forced to involve them. I think at that stage, we will have really good quality education. And I think the key issue here is an outcome focus, because that's what the poor are asking for today. And if that doesn't happen quickly enough, things will change in ways we cannot predict. Things will change in ways that we cannot probably expect. So it's not going to happen because it's a lot of shift people make. People are surprised, taken by shock by saying that so many people have shifted into private schools. Correct, because something has not been delivered by the government system. And And probably if that's a wake-up call, a lot more involvement is done, lot more quality improvement happens, the shift will come back. It's not like private schools are delivering great stuff. But if that doesn't happen, a third alternative probably will also have to come. Maybe people will look at not going into schools, but going into something else, which also, by the way, is also happening. So I think it's hard to predict, but the point is to listen to the poor, respect their views, and I think taking that into account, looking at what is the next step forward, will probably be the way to go forward in education. And I think the small changes in education that a bureaucrat can bring is not good enough at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Balaji made a very passionate plea for respecting the parent, giving the parent and the community the dignity and the rights that they deserve. And it's only through a participatory system where their opinion is asked for and policies are formulated on the basis of this participatory process that proper policies at all can evolve. So that was his plea. And of course he also pointed out that for the poor today it is the choice within very limited choices. So how do you provide proper choices, and who designs these choices? We also talked about nationalization of schools. Now that is what we generally mean by common school system with neighborhood schools, which Dr. Rajgopalan mentioned by and large existed in Kamaraj days, except for a handful. All of us studied, in our generation, all of us studied in schools where the rich and the middle classes and the poor all studied together, which is held up anywhere in the world as the model for educational development. Anyway, so now it's now we are past 12 o'clock. I don't know whether we should have a session of discussion among the panelists. I think now there are so many distinguished participants. Yeah, just 1 minute. So there we have a number of, I can see many faces that behind which there is rich experience and rich, thought that has gone into these people. So we would like to throw open the discussion to the floor. So Mr. Vijay Kumar wants to make some clarification. With that, we will pass it on to you.
Just about, as a point of clarification about 2-3 issues, just to amplify, I said hierarchy, in a government system hierarchy matters. I don't say hierarchy is the best. So I just want to clarify to Mr. Balaji Sampath, I don't say hierarchy and dictatorial system is the best way, but given the constraints we have, when you have hierarchy, when the hierarchy matters, it is better that we use the hierarchy, number one. Secondly, this discussion before we launch a program, the policies, programs have been discussed in depth and it has been given to a bureaucrat. And the bureaucrat is not sensitive to look at the spirit of the policy and program. It has to be sensitization. That's the only answer. Secondly, when detailed discussions have been taken, let us say ABL, the process which we have introduced. Now, you take any literature on education, it says the process has to be child-centric. It can't be teacher-centric. Provide opportunity for the children to learn. Learning is always individual. It can't be a collective exercise. So there are a number of features that has been built in, prescribed by pedagogues, by Government of India in their policy of education, in the Right to Education Act, even earlier. So giving effect to that program, I don't think, see, if we keep on discussing about program at all levels, when are we going to implement? It can never be implemented. So when the program is given to you, these are the futures, you implement it, then the bureaucrat's duty is to implement, of course, take the feedback and take course correction. But keeping on discussing without implementing, I think it will take us nowhere. And RTE, it talks about quality. I just want to clarify, please take section 29 and read RTE Act. It talks about quality. Again, outcome is a product of the process. If you want good learning outcomes, the process have to be clear. The process have been very clearly delineated in RTE. Kindly get hold of RTE Act, read section 29. My only concern was all peripheral things of RTE gets highlighted, but whereas the core issue, the main issue of quality it doesn't get reflected either in the course of discussion by civil society or at government level or at media. And finally, see, if governmental schools do not work, the solution does not lie in starting a parallel system. See, few volunteers through remedial can teach children which we say that they are doing very well. Then why not that become a regular course? If governmental systems, if government schools do not work, the solution lies in making it work rather than starting a parallel system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vijay Kumar. So he brought the issue back to this hierarchy that exists. Now maybe we don't mean the hierarchy within the bureaucracy alone, but definitely there is a huge hierarchy in the educational system. In fact, I sometimes feel that the two defining characteristics of the Indian social system, hierarchy and exclusion, these are very neatly transposed to the education system. That's why you have multi-level schools, the multi-level evaluation of these schools, multi-level perceptions of these schools. So this is, both of them agreed that this hierarchy will have to be eliminated. Anyway, now we will throw it open to the floor. I know there's a lot of wisdom I can see here. Please make your interventions short. If you want to ask questions, and if you could point out to any one of the panelists to answer, please do that. Otherwise, it can also generate more discussion. Yes, excuse me. Yes, yes. I'm sorry, I don't know the names. Yes.
I appreciate Mr. my friend Rajagopalan.
Can you please speak into the mic?
Rajagopalan, that the politics should supersede everything now. It's inevitable. At the same time, I want to ask him 3 questions. He is aware the education in starts at age 3, not at 6. We are taking only from 6. That is one. Number 2 is we want everybody to work only for 8 hours. Education is also it's also a work, and they are made to work. Even on Saturdays, Sundays, 18 hours or say 15 to 16 hours, they are made to work. These are 2 things I want to ask. And the number 3 item, we are ignoring. I think education is a wide subject, and my friend Sambandham has limited this particular thing because sex education, nobody has mentioned about it. That is one of the most important. First you say food, then water, and the third is sex. That is being totally ignored and negated. I want an answer from my friend Rajagopal.
Can we just take a few more questions and then we can answer? Yes. Yes. The lady there in black. Ishwari. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a social work student from Banyan. I would like to share my little experience. I come from Uttarakhand and the Almora district, Dr. Mangala mentioned. And I would like to share some of the experiences I had there. When we talk about RTE, we talk about children. But I would like to share my perspective from the perspective of a teacher. Because when we work on the hills, there is a policy in Uttarakhand, like we transfer the teachers from plain to the hills for 10 years at a stretch. So the young teachers, like if I can take an example of mine, if I am a young student wanting to be a teacher, so there is no light, no electricity, no roads, and the area is out of the contact from the city for around half of the year. So there is a possibility that we should focus on the frustration or the job satisfaction level of a teacher. So the teacher-child ratio, when we see in the hills, it's like 60:1, one teacher for 60 children in a primary school. So is there any scope for the teacher to involve the community or the panchayat? Because he also been sent for the elections around the panchayat elections. He is the one of the member in that. If we see he has been sent for all of the trainings in the district, and he has a charge of 60 students in a primary school. So when we talk about the community participation and involving parents or talking about parent-teacher associations, so I would like to ask, is there any scope for one teacher in one hill with 60 children in a primary school?
Yes, Ravi Shankar and then Prince.
One aspect that I wanted to highlight in this thing that didn't come out possibly is that I think Dr. Rajgopalan mentioned about how in those days 98% children were going to government schools and this concept of private schools were not there. But I think the other important point also was that there was a connect between the teachers and the students that they were serving.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that, you know, the servant and the master's children went to the same school, but that also meant that the teacher could connect with both. I think today the problem is not just that the poorest children are going to these schools, but the teachers who are serving them have a huge disconnect with these children. And in this context, particularly the government school, how do you expect the system to deliver is a big question, because many teachers are money lenders. Their incomes are 10 times that of, at least 10 times that of, you know, the kind of children and the parents who are attending. And in that context, do you expect this kind of, you know, inclusion and some kind of a sensitivity to happen is, I think, going to be a big question. In fact, today the private school teachers, I think, have better connect. Whatever be the merits or demerits of the private school, those teachers come from the same economic background, more or less the similar economic background as the students. And that factor, I think, is very important in assessing what systems can deliver.
Yeah, next one. No. Balaji, just wait. Balaji, just wait. Let them finish and then all of us can answer. Yeah, next, Prince.
Good morning. I'm happy that Hindu Center gave the panel discussion title as Making RTE Effective and not RTE Act Effective.
Yeah.
It should be noted what's going on at the present is RTE versus RTE Act. I wish to ask this august audience to kindly make note that school management committees are applicable only to the government and the government aided schools and not to the unaided schools. Number two, the Supreme Court by its judgment has totally left the minority managements out of the purview of RT Act, including section 12(1)(c). And the July 2nd, 2012, the judgment of the Madras High Court clearly stated that the right of children to education completely stands diluted, and in the present scheme of act and rules does not permit a child to get himself or herself admitted in a school of its choice. These judgments has to be taken into account, and the government of India is the respondent here, the state government is the respondent here. They have not gone for any appeal. That means there is nothing in this act that we should understand. Number two is that the people want their children to learn, especially the working class people. When I walk on the streets, when the children come from the school, a parent who is selling some flowers or fruits, they ask their child, what did you learn? They don't ask their child, what mark did you score? What is the homework? They don't ask. So from this we should draw that the working class people still, the ordinary people, still want their child to learn. And this learning does not taking place in the school. And when we are talking about quality, we should understand that quality cannot be discussed separately from other issues. The quality education can be provided, that is the quality education, by that we mean the child is allowed to learn. When we want to allow the child to learn, there's certain space is required where the teachers are not stressed, where there are sufficient number of teachers, where there are teachers of different natures like physical education, art, etc., are also there. But in the present system, the teacher is not only a teacher, but also an administrator who is also a clerk. And now he is placed at the position of a clerk where he carries out the instructions. And lastly, I like to draw the attention of this House to the fact that almost all the recommendations of the educational commissions have been negated when the policy framework 1986 was drawn, which became the 1992 policy. The 1968 policy was exactly revised, that is reversed in the 1986 policy. And this 86 policy went into the neoliberal agenda that resulted in the present RT Act. And lastly, The South American experience of the Paulo Freire education, the education where there is participation, has not been discussed here. When we talk about economics, we go to Adam Smith. But when we talk about education, why do we not go to Paulo Freire or Jyotiba Phule is a big question. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, madam. Yes, please.
I'm Rajat Padmanabhan from an organization called Vidyasagar. We work with disability. And in the RTE Act, disability has not been mentioned specifically. Having said that, I still think that RTE is a mind-boggling act. And if there is anything that's going to make a huge change, it is the RTE, because it talks of all children, and disabled children come within that purview. The other thing I want to say is that it's only in education that a lot of statements are actually made without substantiating those statements, and that sometimes worries me. Now, there are private schools and private schools. Having worked in villages with disability, we are talking of the private schools and villages which are really shops. It's not any better, they could be worse. And we did a very small experiment, hardly an experiment, because we took only 3 schools to find out why the children, disabled and non-disabled, go to private schools. Unanimously, the answer was English. It wasn't better quality, it wasn't anything. They unanimously, now that's not a huge substantiation of a statement, but at least there was a small little experiment with 3 schools. And I guess that is what I want to say.
Yes, sir. The person behind you? Yeah. Who?
Excuse me, madam. Just 2 things I want to. First thing was about the teachers, which the lady mentioned. Quality of education is about how good quality teachers you have. How does the system or the RTE incentivize good teachers to get into government schools and provide good education? Given the fact that I want to draw a parallel with the National Rural Health Mission, where noble objectives are being forced on ASHA workers for a paltry sum. So how does RTE incentivize good teachers? Secondly, the uniformity of the curriculum. I want to point to a report on the front line which pointed out certain schools teaching different perspectives of historical events. So there are different interpretations of the same historical event. Is there any mention of uniformity of curriculum in the RTE? For example, there was one other school, I don't want to mention the name, which mentioned the main problems which the country face is number 1, the minorities, 2, scheduled castes, 3, scheduled tribes, etc. Now these are being forced into young minds. How does RTE address this?
Yes, sir. Okay.
I have a question for Dr. Rajgopalan. Just
One second. Speak to the
My name is Abhijit. I'm a MA Social Work student at the Banyan in Kovalam. I have a question for Dr. Rajgopalan. These days, or anytime, the children spend more time with their teachers in school more than their parents. But these days, very often we read in newspapers that the parents are raising their voice against the corporal punishment. And around a fortnight back, I read a news about parents raising their voice for the children broke taps in the school, and the teacher kept the children outside their class for 1 or 2 periods, and parents made an issue out of that. So what do you think in this period should be the role of a teacher in school? Whether he should just come and deliver his lecture and go, or he should be more of a guide and mentor to the students? Second thing I would like to share about my experience in Nemeli village. As part of my fieldwork, I got a chance to spend around a month in that village in my last semester. There is a government school, government primary school, and there is a government high school. In the government primary school, there were hardly around 7 to 8 students with 1 teacher for them. And when I spoke to the teacher, she said the people they want their children to go to private schools. The Nemeli village, most of the people are either fishermen or farmers. So they work there, they do all the possible hard work to enroll their students in primary school. So they don't get sufficient enough students in government schools. Second thing, the girls drop out from the schools after their puberty. The reason being not good enough toilets and facilities for the girl students to maintain their hygiene in school when they attain the puberty age. The third observation was the teachers find a lack of motivation because of low number of students enrolled in the government schools. And another observation that I had in the village was that a lot of students, they try to get a white collar job and they are running away from the traditional profession of fishing or agriculture. So these are the things I wanted to mention.
Justice Chandru, yes, in fact, I would, apart from whatever he is going to say, I would like to request, maybe on behalf of many of us, how this act, Right to Education Act, with all its flaws, when we recognize that it's a milestone in a long march to attain our objective, and the RTE Act at least assures education as a fundamental right. So in which case, how much of it is really justiciable? Can a child or the parent go to the court and sue the government for not putting in all the norms and standards, making this RTE workable through the courts, through judicial pronouncements? Thank you.
Friends, the right to education and the RTE Act 2009 are two different issues. But the RTE Act is only 2 years old. As you are aware, it only talks about admission procedure at the first standard or at the kindergarten level, and therefore it will take another 8 years to find out whether the object of admitting 25% of the economically deprived has been fulfilled, and if so, whether it has really achieved the object of right to free education. Therefore, one aspect is the act, the other aspect is the right to education. And I would like to first make an observation that in the last 63 years, the lawmakers and the courts have confused the issue relating to education. The first confusion started when the Constitution specifically said the education will stay with the state subject and not a union subject. The central government started making many changes, even in respect of school education, namely starting their own pattern of education in the school education. That was the first transgression of a constitutional objective. The second transgression took place when the emergency came. The subject from state list was taken over to the concurrent list, even the ordinary education, and therefore, in the light of the transfer of power to the concurrent list, they have framed a National Council for Teacher Education, which is a centralized body which is supposed to coordinate and set standard for education. The result was we had thousands of teacher training institutes being licensed by them, maybe with reason or without reason, and there has been a mushrooming of teacher training institutions being started. Now we start thinking about teacher eligibility tests to find out whether those teachers have got diplomas and degrees, have got really the qualification. So first you allow mushrooming growth of teacher institution, then you put some standardization test to find out whether they are really qualified or not. Therefore, we are now entering into a great area where without experience and without thought process, these legal changes are being made. The second thing which some other speakers said, that after the Panchayat Raj Act came, the education was specifically shifted to local bodies, whereas state government like Tamil Nadu are not willing to shift the education to local bodies, and it continues to be a central subject, as Mr. Rajagopalan said. The net result was we have a highly centralized teacher appointments and teacher directorate with very little supervision and control, and this has resulted in totally diluting the process of imparting education to children. I will only give you two examples, which is a very shocking thing which is taking place. I am only talking about the experience of Tamil Nadu, that today as Mr. Vijay Kumar said, that 96% have been enrolled. If you go to any village, the enrollment process takes place by taking into account the census report of all the eligible children who has to be schooled. Their names are taken and they are admitted to the local government school. Actual practice is that we have now find about 41% have been shifted to private school. Therefore, the children are admitted to government school initially at the instance of the government school teachers, and thereafter they are also actually studying in a private school. So we are having a muster roll scandal in this state in a large scale, that students in a village are all in school on paper, but 50% of them are studying in a private school by payment. Though we have an act for a free compulsory education, but in reality, the parents are paying through their nose to a private school. During inspection time, these children are either brought by persuasion for the purpose of inspection, because in our state, the inspection takes place during the month of August, and during that time, on prior intimation, the children may come to government school. So nobody bothers about this. Thousands of crores of money are spent on this education on paper. That is one. Secondly, as everybody said, that the teacher's quality, that today a primary school teacher, if there are couples in a village, they earn about 40,000 rupees as salary, both of them together, and through electronic crediting system, the money comes to their bank account on the night of 31st of the month, and they are the richest people in a village. Even the biggest landlord do not have liquidity cash of so much amount on a month beginning. This results in buying of land or lending money, and in order to continue in the same station, pay money to the directorate to continue in the same station, and that is what we are having. And the third thing is that we are having a recruitment process only by employment exchange and by the seniority in the employment exchange. There is no other tests are conducted for recruiting teachers, and this is a very big scandal. And if you see for +2 postgraduate teachers, the advertisement says the candidate should not exceed 57 years for making application. Last year there was a case before me, which a person was 57 years old, you want to have a teacher post, only 1 year to serve in the place. When I asked him, why do you want to go? Sir, 1 year I want to be in government service. This is how, in the name of increasing employment, we have not shown enough care in recruiting teachers to these places. These are the major deficiencies which I find in the education system. But after the act came, in 2009 act, when this was challenged by the Rajasthan Unaided Private School Association, the Supreme Court judgment delivered by the Chief Justice was on a very weak foundation. It only said on a reasonable restriction this law is valid. This is a very weak foundation because Constitution, you will find, applies to state several articles. There are also articles which applies to private persons. Now Article 17, which abolishes untouchability, applies to every Indian citizen, and therefore if Article 21A provides for education for all, compulsory free education, then the state should not be left from its obligation. But unfortunately, Chief Justice Kapadia has said the word for is missing from Article 21A. State provide for, it is the word for is missing. Therefore the state provide meaning it can provide through agencies. That means in a school education, today you want private participation, thereby the judgment has bailed out the state's responsibility of providing a primary pre-compulsory education. That's one point. The word for, according to the judges, are missing, and therefore the state can provide, or it can provide through other agencies, and therefore it left to the private schools. Now the second question is, why did the Supreme Court leave out unaided minority schools? Now, in the very question of leaving unaided minority school throws a very lot of disappointment, because in South India, especially in Tamil Nadu, number of schools are run by minorities only, and therefore you leave aside one big chunk of the people from outside of this 25%, which is a very, very wrong exemption that has been granted, and that is a matter to be fought out in court. I am not going on this issue, but other question that comes for consideration is, under what is a neighborhood school? Who decides? Suppose within 1 kilometer there are 4 schools, one unaided school, one aided school, and one government school. Who decides I want to have admission in this case? Because these are the matters which come to court often. In the 2 years back when this act came to force, number of cases came to court, and after delivery of those judgments, one of the UPA partner, Karunanidhi, said
the central government must address its concern on these issues raised, but no central government has advised on any concern. At least there are three issues. One was, what is a neighborhood? Nobody decides. Who decides? Suppose I make an application and they don't give me admission, then I must go to a government school or I must go to an aided school, then I must go to the local body. Now we have education under the education department, but local bodies, where does it come in? Now what happens is the mayor gives letter to all schools, please admit the students. So there is a large scale confusion and corruption in this area of neighborhood school. The second question is that it provides for economically poor or socially poor. The question comes, there was a case where a parent, both of them are in software companies, drawing about 2 lakh rupees each, 4 lakh per month. They said we belong to backward class and therefore we should be admitted under this class. But whereas in defining the poor, the state government has prescribed 9,000 rupees as a salary. Does it mean economically poor or socially, educationally backward with no limit of salary? This is another question which they have not answered. The third question is that as between the local body and the education department, who should control the schools? Now the Act talks about local body, thinking that these schools are under the local body, but whereas in some other state, the education is under the education department. Now who will intervene in the case of a violation of the non-admission? And fourthly, another question came, if there are more number of applications, how to select candidates? In one case in Kilpack, where a complaint was made, the local MLA was called and a random selection was made. The school said we have made random selection, but the MLA's presence was questioned because he was there to put his own people. So now there is no public scrutiny on this random selection method. These are all the issues which are raised but never answered by the government, even though there was a demand to answer these questions. Thank you.
Me, there is one issue on which I would like to get your opinion. That is, this act guarantees a fundamental right, and then this act specifies certain norms and conditions that are to decide the quality in schools. All schools are supposed to put these norms and standards in place. Now there is no financial memorandum attached to the act. So there is absolutely no assessment of the need for allocation of resources. So the government can just get away with allocating 3% of its GDP, which it is doing now. Just 3.8% of the GDP is allocated to education, while even in the 60s, 6.6% was mandated. Now, so is it possible for a citizen to go to the court and say that all the norms and standards set in the mentioned in the act must be implemented by the government and by the state, and a financial assessment of what it means to have so many teachers, so many classrooms, so many toilets, all these, nothing has been worked out. So the government is just getting away with it and passing on the responsibility to PPP and all the other models. Is it possible for a citizen to go to the court and say that government should put in a financial memorandum guaranteeing that all the norms and standards will be implemented in all the schools?
Though I earlier belonged to judiciary, I will never advise this public interest litigation because, as somebody said, unless you have a committed person to implement this order, and they'll admit the case and it will be pending for another 10 years. I think we should build a lot of public pressure on this so that the government will be able to take a decision on these matters. In fact, it was very unfortunate that none of them from the education department are present here, though a very important issue being discussed. I don't find any of the present educational administrators are present here. And we should actually pressurize and take to streets. I will never advise people to go to court because public interest litigations are nothing unless there is a motivation to implement those orders. I may pass some orders, nothing will be implemented, then what happens? And therefore going to the court is the very weakest part of this exercise, and we should also have a strong public movement on this issue, and if possible take to further issue, as Sampath said, to the parents, and they should mobilize them to build some opinion on this issue. Even if we go to public interest litigation, the courts are not going to decide whatever we wanted. We should have a concrete proposal as to how this should be done, then the court may be able to ask the government to consider those issues. And I'm not ruling out the public interest litigation, but that should be the last object, last resort.
Thank you. Yes, madam.
Okay, I'm Dipti Bhatia from Vidyasagar, same organization. We work with children and adults with disabilities. Now, the Right to Education Act, RTE, does have an amendment, and it has included persons with disabilities, which is great, both the acts that relate to persons with disabilities. So today I can, as a person working in the sector, can tell the parents, go ask for admissions and you will get it. So that is a absolute positive. The other thing is that if they are not admitted in the age, they need to be admitted in the age-appropriate classes. So if they are delayed admission, then the appropriate training that is to be given there, the disabled need to be considered. The third thing, it's only comments, it's actually no questions. The third thing is that children should not be discriminated on grounds of caste, creed, disability, gender, so on, right? In classroom, on the grounds, in toilets, access to everything. Now here, discrimination will happen if the facilities are not provided for persons with disabilities. Provided such as an accessible toilet, accessible ramps, these are considered anyway. But accessible learning materials need to be thought of. Accessibility to a positive attitude needs to be thought of, and these are things that need to be put in place. What has happened today is persons with mild and moderate disabilities are anyway getting included. It is persons with multiple disabilities that get left out, more because they need transport, which needs to be provided, otherwise it is discrimination. They need assistance, that is assistance in the form of personal assistance, because that will only protect the dignity of a person with disabilities when support is required. So if these are put into place, and there is scope for this because there is an act, and there is a scope for doing because persons with disabilities now will voice out their opinions. So we are together, we had to fight for it, the disability component being included, and the implementation also, we need to work together on it. Thank you.
I'm Mrs. Krishnaswamy from Maduram Narayan Center, a center which provides early intervention services. My concern is, you were talking about private schools and government schools in the 6+ education, but the children who enter the first standard of the primary school come with the baggage. The parents have already sent them to schools, daycare center, preschools, private, mostly private, and therefore they are coming with whatever skills or knowledges or knowledge or values or attitudes that they have gained from their experiences. Now, shouldn't the RTE Act go little bit behind and link them with this? That is my concern. And if that happens, I think the children with disabilities also will have a place.
Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Virgil from Arunodaya Center for Street and Working Children based in Chennai. Through the effort of many of the civil society groups, we were able to make education as a fundamental right. And when you say it is a right, and I think it's a responsibility of the state to give that right to all its citizens. It cannot shirk its responsibility. So the state has to provide free quality education, and how we could make the state to provide it. I'm not satisfied with the 25% reservation. It should be 100% reservation for all children in the state-run schools. The state cannot say we do not have money, because we know Amartya Sen, once he said, it's not poverty, economic poverty, but attitudinal poverty, which is keeping the state behind. So we should make the state take the responsibility. How we do it? and he mentioned from Aid India, it's only we talking, people like us. But are we taking it to the people? How we are making the community to ask for it? And there are some examples here and there. In our organization, in a place, in a relocation site, where the fishing community have been relocated, the school was built, but it was not opened. So the community was mobilized to fight for it, and now we can see the center, the school, functioning effectively. So it can happen. So I think more than talking about the RTE Act, in addition to it, we should see how we can go into the community, mobilize those people to ask for the rights, not to see that quality education is given. And they also talked about the choices that people have. We should give them the choice to go to any school that they want. But it's not just giving the choice, but if they are going to the private school, people from the poor community, from the slums, what kind of private schools they are going into? This mushrooming private schools, which quality is much less than government schools, because the teachers are paid very low. The teachers do not have any education qualification, but they prefer to go there because maybe they say mommy, daddy, and sing the rhymes. But is that the choice that we want these people to take? So we should make the government, again and again I say, that people like us mobilize the people to make the government provide free quality education to all the people, and go in for the nationalization of education, which we call as the common school system, where everyone will go to the neighborhood school, both poor and the rich, everyone, so that their education really becomes an equalizer fact.
Hi everyone, I'm Vasundhara Srinath from the Hindu Center. I'm the Chief Coordinator for Research. And I just wanted to say, thank you for this panel. The second thing is that when our team was trying to write the concept note, we got really puzzled about what the expansion of education really meant. And I know that, Sam, who's sitting right here, and all of us came up with a bunch of ideas, and we said, well, at some point we have to ask this to the panelists. The first of which was, is it entirely possible that when we think of the expansion of education and basic education, we may be missing out on other types of expansion of basic skilled education? And the second part being, what is the place of homeschooling? Because I often think that if I was living as an educated person in a small town and my only option was a madrasa and a government school, I would much rather teach my kids at school, being educated and skilled and things like that. I also wanted to address very quickly the issue of expansion and quality. I don't think it's a staged process. I don't think the expansion of education in terms of just opening a lot of schools and then making sure that people are in there is divorced in some ways from the idea of quality education. I say that because in 2008, I went to the school called the Scindia Girls' School in Gwalior, and at some point they decided that as an alum, they should use me for teacher selection. And so I went there, and then a bunch of candidates, I study political science, I was supposed to select a political science teacher. A bunch of candidates came, and one by one we were interviewing them in a panel. Now this woman comes in, and by the way, the Scindia school, I'll make it short, sure. Well, the basic point I was trying to make is that these were people with PhDs who applied for the position, and we asked them to give a little demo on how would you teach Article 14 to these students. And most of them didn't know what Article 14 was, and they had PhDs. Now, I think the quality of education is very linked to the kind of education we give at the higher level in our country, which actually makes us produce teachers that can't actually teach. And Akshay has something to say about teacher absenteeism, but we can talk about that later. Thanks.
The last question is because we are running out of time. We have to give a little time to the panelists to respond. Yes.
I am Dr. Edil Vendan, poet and researcher. I want the opinion of the panel regarding common entrance tests for medical and engineering education, and much attention is given for scoring rather than learning. When I was invited for a poet symposium, I said, அன்றெல்லாம் ஆசிரியர் இல்ல திண்ணைகள் எல்லாம் பள்ளிகளாயிருந்தன, இன்றெல்லாம் டியூஷன் பண்ணைகளாயின என்று சொன்னேன். Your opinion on tuition and coaching industries?
Private tuition has been banned in RTE.
Yes, banned private tuition. So if it is happening, it is illegal, and therefore the state must step in to stop it. Yeah, so there is a...
By the school teachers.
That's where the money is.
So we will stop the session, and some questions have been asked, addressed to some panelists. If you would like to reply, Dr. Rajgopalan.
Only one sentence.
Number of questions have been asked. I know that everyone who asked the question knows the answer also. That is for the sake of asking a question, questions have been answered. That is what they want to know, how we think. Therefore I am not answering any question. One thing, two things we have, no. What is education? We have not contemplated anything about what is education. What do you mean by an educated person? How is an educated person different from others? That we have not thought about it. That is the most fundamental question that we have to answer. Secondly, who should be a teacher? Uwe Samanadiyar cannot teach first standard according to our rules now. That is the rule. So, the mere prescription of paper qualifications will not make a person a good teacher. What is the first qualification of a teacher? He must love children. He must be child-friendly. He must not have a long face when he goes to the classroom. He must be a smiling person. These are the basic essential qualities of a teacher. Otherwise, he grows while in service. He may not know anything now, but as he goes and teaches in the classroom, he also learns along with the students. Therefore, ultimately, he will be a very good teacher. Therefore, you need not expect that anyone who joins the service should be a perfect teacher. Nothing, it can't be done. There is no one as a perfect teacher. A good teacher is one who learns every day and every moment of his life. Therefore, this is what I would like to emphasize. If a teacher doesn't have a heart for the child, then he should not be a teacher. Other things are all secondary. Thank you.
Okay. There's response to the question?
Yes, response to
There was, I'd like to just look at 2-3 questions that were raised. One, I think you had raised this question about skilled education. I think in a hierarchical society, it is dangerous. As long as we have a society where children can choose what they want to learn and all fields are equal, having skilled education, basically you mean more like vocational education, is what I'm assuming. That choice becomes useful. Okay. There are many countries where people make that choice, but the society is not very hierarchical here. So the danger of skilled education in India is that the children of the rich will learn computers, the children of the poor will learn to do carpentry. And I think there's a big danger. On the day carpentry and computers get paid equally, I think you can make that skilled education as an option. In India, I want the children of the poor, and the poor want their children to do computer education, English education, all of that. I think Tamil medium education must be made compulsory for the rich, and English medium education must be made compulsory for the poor. That day, we can talk about basically equalizing the stuff. When we say Tamil medium for the poor, I think we are talking we remember the fact that we live in a very highly hierarchical society. Breaking hierarchy is the first job that all of us have. I mean, at some level, the more we do that, I think the better it is. I would like to take one more answer, one more thing, and I mean, sometimes we generally agree, so I'd like to disagree today. So, on many things. So, one of the things is that process leads to outcome. Mr. Vijay Kumar said, I'd like to argue with that. I'd say no. First, what process you are choosing depends on what goals you set. Set the goals which actually are setting outcomes. Measurement of the outcomes will happen after the process, but which process is the process actually delivering outcomes is the result of having set goals. People must understand these are goals that we are going to meet, and if they don't meet it, then basically change the process. Obviously, process is essential, but process does not come before outcomes. I think it's important to keep that in mind. And there are a lot of questions about good teachers. When we say good teachers, we generally mean qualified teachers, and I think there is a problem, and I think SSR sir said it beautifully. A good teacher is one who can teach well. It doesn't matter what their qualifications are. Many highly qualified people are extremely bad teachers. Okay. Similarly, there is this issue that somehow having good big playgrounds, having better infrastructure, etc., all of that matters. It's all matters, but all of that doesn't necessarily translate to great quality education. And I think those are things that we should keep in mind as we discuss.
Yeah. So a few things came up. First came up from this panel and a bit from the audience that why even look at bureaucrats? Bureaucrats are the problem, right? Isn't that the point here, that they're rigid? Why do I even talk about them? Well, there's no effective democracy in the world that does not have a quality bureaucracy. There's no way one can carry out even elections without an effective government agency overseeing it. And that's why bureaucracy is really important. Now, that's not to say that's all that's important. That's one factor among many that we have to look at. And the point I want to raise is actually coming out of many of the questions in the audience. I'll address two. This is about teachers and teacher quality. So the lady that spoke from Almora was talking about teacher involvement and how can I get involved when there's 60 students and I'm being sent up to the hills for 10 years. Well, that's a prime example of a very rigid state system that's not responsive to the needs of teachers, that's not taking in local knowledge, that's not understanding how is it that the professional role of the teacher can be inculcated. And that's why we actually need to understand the role of the bureaucracy, because teachers are quite frankly fed up with it. So that is why we cannot ignore it. And lastly, the question about quality teachers, I'm going to address this from the perspective of RTE Act. I just came from Mumbai, and there's a bunch of schools that are being run, and they're afraid that the teachers are all going to get fired because none of them have B.Eds. Now, if you want to enforce an RTE Act without understanding its objective, which is to educate kids and actually help them learn, you're going to focus on qualification, but you're not going to focus on the capability to teach. So this is one of the perverse consequences of just following the rules blindly without understanding the spirit of the law, which is to ensure education.
I just make 2 points. One that has come up was I mentioned that we have resources, we have schools, we have children, we have teachers. If things have not been happening, it is because of poor implementation. If it is poorly implemented, the solution is sensitizing the person who is in charge of implementation, not PAL. As I beg to differ from Justice Chandru, it is not people. See, we can't instigate people to come to the street and fight. See, we have various ways of sensitizing them. If the bureaucrat has not been doing well, if he is not sensitive to the cause, the solution lies in training them, looking at how he was recruited, how he was trained, than saying the public interest litigation or coming to the street to fight, number one. Number two, time and again the issue has come about quality of education in reference of quality education in RTE. RTE clearly spells out what is the outcome and what is the process. All that I say, when outcome is delineated clearly, when the process also spelled out clearly, supported by international research, it is prudence that we implement the process. We ensure that process is taking place in the schools, therefore outcomes are certain. Thank you.
Friends, I think all of us would agree we have had a very meaningful, spirited session with all the panelists making very effective and implementable also to some extent suggestions, and we have also had very good questions and suggestions coming from the floor, and all through we could see that we did not limit right to education to the Act. I'm happy to see that most of us went beyond the Act, because that itself implies that the Act is flawed. So So ACT definitely is a milestone. In fact, people who came from institutions where exclusion is most atrocious, like from Vidyasagar, they also granted that the ACT is definitely welcome. So it has enabled them in ways that earlier schools were not opening up to them. So this is definitely the ACT should be welcomed as a milestone, but it is just a milestone, and whether parts of it are at all being implemented with a political will, with a bureaucratic will and the social will to back it up. Now this is an issue that we need to take up. And many of us, and finally when Balaji was talking about, is that hierarchy is the issue. Now, we live in a highly hierarchical society, and there are, I think I already said this, everything, definitely the education system is based on the two basic defining characters of the Indian society: hierarchy and exclusion. I think these are the two. These have become totally the foundations of our education system. That is why we have an education system that is most excluding anywhere in the world. This kind of a system that fragments children into mini classes, one for, I mean, we have as many levels in our schools as we have in our caste system. So this is something within this parameter. It's very, very difficult to work out a truly democratic, equalizing education system. But does it mean we have to work for the ultimate revolution and then wait for hierarchy to disappear? No, I don't think we should go to that almost a fatalistic position. Now, you take most developed capitalistic societies today, definitely they are not based on equality, definitely they are not based on a non-hierarchical system, but still they have a common school system with neighborhood schools. The belief is this, the basic belief for this in hierarchical capitalistic societies is that if a country wants to reap the benefits of its entire population resource, then education must be as broad-based as possible. Now, we need to have a Pacific Ocean. We have a Pacific Ocean. You can churn this Pacific Ocean and you can get mountains of butter while we keep on churning a tiny little pond, silt-ridden pond, and what emerges is a minuscule proportion of what we call the world attention-hogging elite. So the hierarchy is an answer. But I think the concept of hierarchy has, in our discussion, not been brought to bear upon all the aspects of education, because this exclusion works in 100 different ways. This exclusion is built into every strand of the Indian education system. It is not only in the multi-track school system where you have, it is a class-based school system where each class goes to the school appropriate to its class level. It is not only that. The curriculum is designed in the interest of in the interest of the elite classes and the middle classes. It was also mentioned. The curriculum is designed that way. The content of the curriculum is designed that way. The pedagogical methods are designed that way. I also mentioned the burden of the curriculum, which makes a child from the working class unable to cope with it. And then the language of the classroom. I don't mean only the language of learning. The very language, the lingo that is used in the classroom, that is alienating as far as children from an elite bust, from a Dalit basti or a village comes in, and the child is immediately alienated by the language that is used in the classroom, which is the language of the upper classes, upper caste. So this is the teachers generally emerge from those classes, or even if they came up from those classes, from the lower classes, then through a Sanskritization process, a sanitization process, they have given up their language. So this at the minute a child from these bastis gets into the school classroom, she loses her voice, she's bewildered, and so she loses her voice and she sinks into a culture of silence, a culture that gives full scope for the culture of oppression. So we need to go into many other aspects. How curriculum is designed. What is the impulse behind the elite that is trying for global competition for their children, design the curriculum, and of course the language of learning. That English, around English, a whole universe of exclusion has grown up. We know that today in India, between those who can speak in English with felicity and aplomb, and for those who can function only in their mother tongue, there is a whole different world. They belong to two different worlds. So we need to look into, and also work. Balaji mentioned that skills in a hierarchical society, you can't talk about skills. I agree with that. In fact, Tamil Nadu had a very bad experience. During Rajaji's period, this was brought in and it was rejected as Kulakalvi. So that is what will happen today. But that is not what is meant by skill development. Skill development is work being integrated into learning for all classes, for all children, from class 1 upwards. That is the way you learn. And if that is done, there will be an advantage to the children coming from the working classes, because they have inherited the culture of work and they participate in the culture of work at home. They will have an advantage over children coming from upper classes. Anyway, I only wanted to tell you that I wanted to share my feeling that we did not go far enough in our understanding of all the dimensions of how the denial of the right to education functions today, but we did cover quite very good ground. And ultimately, what is the answer? We have it from the horse's mouth that you can't go to the court. So we have to mobilize the people. There is no other choice. This is the only choice that you have. It is the people's voice that alone can change this, because everything is tilted against them. I'll just conclude with a favorite joke, a joke that I like quite a bit. I'm sure all of you would have heard of Dennis the Menace, the cartoon character, the 5-year-old cartoon character. He's teaching a game to his friend Joey, who is 4-year-old. Now, this is what he says. Remember, Joey, you can win any game if you are the one to make the rules. Okay? I think the rules are made in this country by the elites, for the elites, of their elites. And how do you break out of this? Only by mobilizing the people, only by going to the Aam Aadmi. I'm not talking about the party. It's not the party, only by going to the Aam Aadmi. And will he do that? Well, let us see. Thank you.
Distinguished invitees, friends from the media, and participants in this public discussion. It's now my pleasant duty to propose a formal vote of thanks. Before that, I thought I would leave a thought after sitting through this very interesting interaction where a host of issues were raised. In the social sciences, we face a certain dilemma that values that are considered universal are not necessarily universalizable. And that is one factor that adds to the gaps in implementation, whether it be primary education or healthcare or the RTE Act. I think it reinforced the impression that we certainly need exemplars. And one exemplar who was mentioned was Kamraj. And perhaps in the context of primary education and in secondary education, we need more such exemplars to take forward meaningful legislations like the RTE Act. I hope this is one takeaway from this very important session. I would first and foremost thank our chairperson of today's discussion, Dr. V. Vasanti Devi, who made very important observations on different dimensions to the issue, though we couldn't cover far enough as she put it. I thank all the panelists, Dr. Akshay Mangla, Assistant Professor of the Harvard Business School, Mr. MP Vijay Kumar, former State Project Director, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, Dr. S.S. Rajagopalan, educationist and former headmaster of the Sarvajna School, Coimbatore, and Dr. Balaji Sampath, Secretary and CEO, Aid India. I also thank some of our special guests on this occasion who added to the discussion, particularly Justice Chandru and others who made it possible to be here today. Thanks to our Board of Management, members of the Board of Management, Mr. N. Ram, Mr. Ravi, and Dr. Malini Pathsarathy, who have been guiding the activities of the Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy. And we hope to increase this kind of interface with the public on important issues that affect us today. I also thank our advisor, Mr. Venkatachalapati, who was here, and several others, including friends from the media, who made this occasion possible. I now invite you all to join us for lunch. Thank you once again.